Okay, good evening everyone. Welcome back after your recess. I hope you have had at least a restful time, or in the case of an honours subject, you've had some time to catch up on any of the work that you had outstanding from last term. As per usual, please can you just put a thumbs up in chat to indicate if you can hear me, so I know that audio is working, and that I can just check to see that the chat is working correctly, because last time we had some weird issue where I wasn't getting messages through on my control panel side, but I was getting them through on my second device. So I have got a second device connected just in case. So I'm waiting for your thumbs up. While I wait for the thumbs ups, just some announcements. The semester tests, including the SIC tests, have been marked and uploaded onto Eve. You need to check the notice on the notice board about retrieving your semester tests. They are hosted via a Dropbox link, and you will have an encrypted zip file. You will need to get your password for the zip file from the mark field on Eve for semester test return passwords. Thank you for the thumbs up. I assume all is good and well, and we can continue then. On another side note, the marking of the mini research assignments is not done yet, and because I am now a week late on those, I am going to extend your main research project by 1 week, so to make up for the difference in time. So I will post a notice on Eve with the details of the extension. Or maybe I won't post a notice on Eve, and I'll just tell you here and now that it's going to be uploaded, and I will open an extended upload after the main date, so anyone who doesn't attend class, well, they'll still be submitting as per normal, and all of you who are attending class will then know that there is an extension of 1 week, and I will make it available after the main submission is due. So the main submission is due in May. I'll just extend it by 1 whole week so that you have an extra week to submit in the extended submission. So please bear in mind that I'll make it sort of like a late extension, a late submission that won't be penalized. So you'll get a whole week of extra time to work on it, but that'll then have to be the final deadline. As you can see, even the mini research assignments take a lot of time to mark. Those research assignments take even more time. So I'm going to need the last 2 weeks of the semester to actually mark them, because they do take a lot of time to mark, and because they are worth 70% of your semester mark, I do go through them very thoroughly to make sure that you get the marks that you deserve. I don't just thumbsuck a mark for you and stick it on a paper. No, I go through it and give you detailed feedback as well, so you can query it if you are missing any sort of understanding, or you want to know why you got the mark you got for things. Will the slot be on Eve? So yes, the extension slot will be posted on Eve, but I'll only open it up after the main slot has closed. So with the main slot, you can upload if you finish beforehand and you just want to get it uploaded. I'll create the normal upload slot, and then once the normal upload slot has closed, I will then the next day open up the extended slot. And you have my word, you won't get penalized for it. You just will have an extra week to submit for it. Okay, so that's the deal for tonight. I'm sorry I'm a bit late on the mini research assignments. I hope that this extra week will give you some extra time to put into those main research projects, because they are worth 70% of the marks. Okay, moving along swiftly. If you do have any queries about the main research project, if there's something you don't understand about it, or there's something that's bothering you, please ask sooner rather than later. Please make sure that you go through the document and read the stuff underneath the mark sheets, all of the stuff that's just kind of like, here are the tips, here are the tricks. Read through them. They'll give you a pretty good idea of where I'm looking for certain things. Like, one of my pet peeves when it comes to any kind of research assignment is if you've got a diagram and you just slap a diagram in there for the sake of having a diagram, or to fill up on the page count. Please don't do that. I'd rather not see a diagram than see a diagram that has no real purpose. So if you do have a diagram, then please refer to it in text. Use it as an aid to help you discuss something, or else it's just a waste of space and it'll be seen as such. And remember, use strong references. Don't just go and find Wikipedia articles, don't just find websites, try and find academic articles. You have access to the UJ Library databases, please make use of them. Even just go to scholar.google.com and then look for stuff there that has a lot of citations to it. If you can find at least 2 or 3 cited sort of like papers or journal entries, then you're golden. If you just list web pages that are like not really credible web pages, it's going to affect your marks a little bit in that regard, because we're looking for, can you go and find the right kind of information? But am I saying that you shouldn't use web pages? No, I'm not, because sometimes a lot of the information that you're going to be looking for might not actually be in an academic journal or in some kind of a research paper. It'll only be in some like site that reports on the business that you're looking for. So if you've got a business that's not like a global international phenomenon business like Amazon, then you're probably not going to find journal articles or anything about it. So in that case, yes, please make use of decent trusted web pages. And if you're unsure about the web page, try and find more than one source for a very important statement that you're going to make. Okay, but as I say, if you do have questions, please ask them. Can we use economic journals and their articles? Yes, you may. Because this is more of a business-oriented kind of subject, you might not find it in computer science-y things, a lot of the stuff we talk about. If you want to talk about maybe structure of the internet and stuff like that, sure, that kind of stuff is researched thoroughly in computer science-related journals, articles, and papers, conference proceedings, those kind of things. Sure, but if you've got something that's like in an economic journal, by all means, make use of it. Another question, if we are researching on Amazon and get the information from Amazon website itself, it would be credible, right? Well, yes and no. Yes, the information would be credible because the company is putting it forward. Would the information be 100% correct though? Maybe not. A lot of organizations don't report all the information clearly and unbiasedly. So bear that in mind when searching for information, that sometimes the organization that's telling you the information could be fabricating a lot of it or could be biased and not telling you the whole story. That's why looking for third parties, and even like something like an economic journal that maybe did some research on like the financials or something like that, could be a much better option than using the organization's own website. Okay, if you do have any questions, be sure to drop them in chat and we can chat about them. If not, you can drop them in the Discord server and I'll talk them after class or tomorrow whenever you post them. But for now, let's move along. So up until this point, we've been talking about content that's been directly out of the prescribed textbook for the course. And from this point onward, we are going to actually be covering content that is either replacing content in the textbook or content that is going to be entirely newer or new and is not actually referred to in the textbook. So a question here is, can we include a business model that we did not cover in our mini research assignment? Okay, so let's say you've done some thinking and you figure out that the business model that you chose to write about in your mini research assignment is wrong, or is not the ideal one for what you actually want to discuss in your main research project. Then yes, by all means, choose the best possible business model. The idea between the mini research assignment and the main project is that the mini research assignment warms you up so that when I give you feedback It'll mostly be feedback about, are you choosing the right kind of sources? Are you writing the right type of information? How are you structuring the argument that you're presenting? It's going to be less focused on what exactly was your organization, what did they do, what was the business model that you chose, how did it work. It is more going to be a warm-up on, did you do the technical kind of stuff correctly? So when you get to the main research assignment, you do the technical stuff correctly, and then you should get most of the marks there. So think about it like that the mini research project was a warm-up for the main research project. And one of the big things I'm going to be looking at in the mini is about, were your references correct? So we've already talked about that. So moving along. Okay, so in terms of tonight's content, we're going to be moving on to, although it is week 8, we are now covering lecture 7's content. And we're now going to actually talk about what exactly is e-business strategy. Now, we've talked a lot about, there is this thing called e-business strategy and this thing called e-business, and it relates to e-commerce because it is like a wrapper that wraps around e-commerce. But now we're going to look at what exactly is this e-business strategy, and how does it actually work internally and externally with the organization? How does it describe the way that we are going to be moving an organization from a purely e-commerce entity into a more e-business oriented entity? And where exactly are we going to be doing these kind of decisions and making these kind of changes, and how's it going to affect the way that the business moves forward? And that's where we're going to look at like strategic planning. So as I said at the beginning of this course is a very high level overview of e-business strategy. We don't actually make you formulate an e-business strategy, because doing that could be an entire module's worth of project on its own, and it doesn't really enable you to do the research aspects that are required for the outcomes of the module. So instead, this is more of an informative, high-level overview of all the topics, that you get an understanding of sort of the foundational topics and see how all of this works together. So that begs the question of, what exactly is the e-business strategy then that we're going to be talking about? So this is going to be one of those important lectures that sort of sets the framework for the important stuff. We're now done with all the foundational topics and understanding of all the basic things and how they interact with one another. Now we're looking at how all of this can be wrapped up together to affect the organization. So just as a side note, this set of lecture slides replaces chapter 7 in its entirety from the textbook, because that one is really quite a bit outdated by now. So let's see what an overview of e-business strategy actually is. So from this new textbook, an e-business strategy is the set of plans and objectives by which applications of internal and external electronically mediated communication contribute to the corporate strategy. And that was out of the textbook. So there's a lot of things here we need to dissect. First and foremost, what is the strategy that we're wanting to contribute to? So strategy is going to be the overall direction of the organization, and the strategy is going to effectively establish what the future working environment of the organization is going to be. So if the organization has a strategy to move into China, that is going to affect all of the decisions that they're going to make to enact those changes to actually break into that market. Now, that strategy needs to be like a very high level thing that needs to be guiding the organization. But then there's this thing called corporate strategy, which is a more definitive version of just the general strategy. And that's going to be, as I said, more like we want to do the following thing. And we want to do it more specifically in a business context. So that'll be things like defining which markets we want to be in, which organizations we want to compete with, and which ones we want to outsource to. Those kind of decisions that are going to contribute to the higher level strategy. And finally, like the competitive or business strategy is going to be what defines the basis on which we're going to compete. So ideally what these strategies are all going to be affecting the direction of the organization. Hence we have, let me just switch to a laser pointer. Hence we've got this set of plans and objectives. So plans are things that we're going to, like steps on what we're going to do. They're going to also be the objectives, the things that we need to achieve with those plans, which can be things that are going to affect the business internally or how we're going to adapt to external factors. And because this is all about electronic commerce, it is going to be held accountable through electronic mediums. Are we going to build websites? Are we going to build supply lines? How are we going to manage the finances? Those kind of things. And then finally, these all need to be wrapped up together to affect the corporate strategy, as we've just discussed. So when we think about e-business strategy, we're going to focus more on a set of questions. Now, here's just a rough set of questions that you can think about that will drive what the organization wants to do in XYZ frame of time. Very often organizations think about the next 5 to 10 years. What happens now or next year, well, we can't really adapt that fast for large organizations. So what happens in the next 5 years to the next 10 years may be the better thing to be thinking about. So these could be things like, where are we going to do business? Which markets? Well, maybe we don't like South Africa's market anymore because there's too many competitors. Maybe we'll look at another neighboring country and try and get a market there we can get into. What can our organization offer that is distinct from that offered by competitors or even collaborative partners? So this bears like questions like, we want to differentiate ourselves from the competition. We also want to maybe differentiate ourselves from our partners so that we can provide a niche but like specialized product in a domain that we're already in. So we're more trying to tailor make what we're doing to fit better into a niche or something like that. Another big question we could ask is, does the organization have the skills, resources, and other assets necessary to achieve objectives? So it's all good and well, we want to move into a new market, but do we have the people that can be the boots on the ground to set up the warehouses, the supply chains, build the security infrastructure, all those kind of things? Do we have the necessary talent and experience? So people. Now, we've already talked a lot about people are important because people effectively are the business. They are the ones that operate the different processes. People are going to be the people who are going to be buying from us, and the people are going to be selling to us so that we can then sell it on to someone else. So bearing this all in mind, we can think about things like, how will the market position change in the next 5 years? So maybe there's a decline in a certain type of product or service, and we see it now, which means we need to already start thinking to the future about how we're going to maybe break into something else to replace the profits that we're going to be losing in the next 5 years prospectively. Or if we see a new technology trend coming up, maybe we want to be investing into that as a means of trying something new that could prove to be a very effective and profitable venture in future. And what will our competitors be doing in 5 years? Well, if you notice certain trends taking place, then it's very likely that other organizations have also noticed it and are wanting to do similar things. Now, unfortunately, you can't just go and ask your competitors. But what you can do is you can start looking at what the competitors' current service offerings are. What kind of products are they selling? Are they adapting? Have they made any new notices about new products or services that they might be offering? So one of the big things, and we use this example of the PlayStation 5 versus the Xbox. Now, one of the big things when it comes to something like a product war, when you've got two competitors, you have two flagship products that are in direct competition with one another, is sometimes announcing it first could be great because you get the word out to people first. But also the hype will then die down from your product, and then maybe when the competitor comes along and says, well, they've already announced their product, we're going to make a few changes, and up and then announce our product and then tell everyone how much better it is than the other product, which means there sometimes is this gamble. Do you release first or do you wait to release second? So understanding the way the market works and the way the products are positioned can very often be make or break whether you'll win over customers to your product or if they'll go to the competitor. And that then brings us to the last kind of major question is, what benefits will our customers expect in 5 years? Well, if you've got a set precedent for a certain kind of product and your competitors are producing a certain kind of product which has a certain set of services at maybe a certain price point, then you can't release a product that does not meet that bar, or else it will be instantly dismissed by customers, because customers will go, well, why are you trying to give us this product when it's arguably inferior to the one that's already been released by a competitor? Well, then you might need to ask questions about the price, the availability. Those kind of things can all be very important. So understanding what the customer is, what the customer wants, and how the customer should respond to your product or service offering can be very important. Okay, so moving along. So if you think about an e-business strategy is going to be in and of itself a strategy. It is going to be a strategy which is going to mobilize the e-commerce aspects of the organization into as an efficient, well-oiled machine as possible. But in order for the e-business strategy to actually work, be functional, be able to do things, it needs to be supported. Now, this could be things like being supported by the corporate strategy, the way that the business actually runs. If you've got this wonderful idea that you want to have your e-commerce organization completely automate completely automate factory production lines with robots, the corporate strategy has to actually support that. Maybe the corporate strategy is going to be, well, no, we want more people in our business to make it a more people-centric business. Then the e-business strategy will not be supported by the corporate strategy and therefore cannot go ahead. Also, the e-business strategy needs to be supported by things like the marketing strategy and the information system strategy. So if you're wanting to build new infrastructure, you have to make sure that you've got the right systems in place to do it. And if you're wanting to release new products in this new strategy, you need to have the right marketing in place to actually get it to people's hands. If people don't know about your product, they're never going to use or want it or buy it. Now, the next two are the financial strategy and the operation strategy. So financial strategy, is there actually going to be money that can be dedicated to the strategy? If you need a budget of, say, 10 million Rand to get the right infrastructure, the right people, the right training, all those kind of things, but finances can only give you half of that, well, it begs the question, will you be able to produce half the strategy, or will you need to reduce the scope of the strategy, or what will you need to do to get everything working? So as you can see, a lot of this whole e-business strategy needs to depend on all of the other strategies within the organization. So operations strategy is going to be the day-to-day functioning of the organization. If you're wanting to replace people's jobs, people are not going to be happy about that. But also, do you have the right way of operating inside the organization for it to be conducive to the e-business strategy? If not, then maybe the operations strategy needs to be updated in line with what you have planned for the e-business strategy. Next up, we have things like research, innovation. And research and innovation is going to be, what are you going to do to make your products and services better? And then finally, we have production strategy, which is going to be things like your production lines, your supply lines, those kind of things. Are they all in place? So there's a question. So the e-business strategy is separate from the overall strategy of the business, even in businesses that only operate online. Well, the final point, this is quite a well-timed question, is that the e-business strategy can be a separate operation entirely. You could have, in say, a big organization, an e-business strategy department, which is responsible for managing managing the whole organization strategy. They will then consult with corporate. They will then ensure that they give marketing the right information. They will then ensure that information system strategy is updated as need be. So it can be an entirely separate entity, if you will, just like HR and finance are considered separate entities in large organizations. So if you notice anything about UJ, the Faculty of Science is completely separate from finance. Finance is completely separate from student registrations. They're all separate entities that all operate within the umbrella of the organization. Now, in a smaller organization, such as an online-only business, it might not be possible to dedicate manpower to having a completely separate entity to do all these kind of things. Instead, organizations will usually, from the top down, from sort of a visionary position, strategize and then incorporate the e-business strategy into all the aspects of the organization. So they will say, well, information systems, we need you to start updating these kind of things. So corporate strategy will then affect like the information system strategy, and all these things will then work together, hopefully harmoniously. So to answer your question, the overall strategy of the business can be separate, but it doesn't have to be. It can be embedded as well. So some important things to note here is that if you want to, however, implement the e-business strategy as a separate operation, but there's going to be some constraints that you might need to manage the way in which you're going to be innovating within the organization, and sometimes separating things can have an adverse effect on progress, because if people view the change as internal and organic, they then are often more inclined to move along with those kind of changes. But if they see the changes as coming from an external entity, even if it's just a different department in the organization, there might be greater resistance to it, and this will require new ways of trying to interact with and deal with other other operations within the organization. And the idea is that this change that you're going to be making could actually have an impact on not only just the internals of the organization, but it should then also affect the way that you interact with your customers, because you're going to be making changes. But finally, it's going to be affecting the way that you're going to compete in the market. So all of these things need to be considered. And this is why you might or might not want to actually develop your e-business strategy as a separate business function, because the way it's going to interact with the organization might affect the organization internally, but also might affect the organization and the market at large externally. The customers, the people who are going to sell the product, the people who are going to interact with the product and ship your product, etc. So the way in which you implement it needs to be done very tactfully. So how do we actually develop an e-business strategy? Now, development of an e-business strategy is not just something that you're going to do like click your fingers and now you're developing an e-business strategy. You need to make sure, as with most things, that you acquire the right business competence. And this is what we call stage 1 of the 4-stage plan to develop an e-business strategy. Now, stage 1 is where you're going to go and acquire your key staff members. This could be things like hiring new people, training existing people, or outsourcing work for people, maybe even consulting with people who professionally do business strategies for organizations. And this is where you're going to want to begin your design and development and execution phases. That's because now that you've got the right people, you're able to then competently, very importantly, competently be able to design your strategy. You're able to then implement the things that need to be implemented, and then finally move to execution of the plan. That brings us then to the second stage, where you need to establish a channel and acclimatize a startup community. So with any change that's being made, you need to then get people on board with you. Most notably, you need to get the people who are going to affect the bottom line on board. That'll be the customers. Now, if, let's say, Takealot were to come out with a new product. So you know how Takealot has now got Mr. Delivery, and Mr. Delivery now does all of their courier-related aspects for the organization, but there's also Mr. D Food, which is now going to be delivering food and picking up food from people and delivering it to you. When Takealot did that, Takealot couldn't just stand by their brand name of having Takealot. They had to market the Mr. Delivery food so that people go, oh, this is Takealot's Mr. Delivery food, so maybe they're trustworthy, we can make use of them. That's a cool idea. I never knew about that before, etc. Those kind of things. So this will be the stage where you need to actually develop the applications. You need to actually get them hosted, get them readily accessible to people with the right channels, and then advertise them so that people can then be able to make use of it. But if people aren't aware of it, they won't be able or won't want to make use of it. So this is where the advertising sort of portion of it comes in. Now, the stage 3 is when we're going to extend the applications and increase community dependence. So a lot of the times when new organizations or new products are launched by existing organizations, there's a way of incentivizing you to join. Get delivery for free on your first meal, or get 10% off. They'll incentivize you with some kind of a voucher or something like that. And that will hopefully get you into the ecosystem, that you will then see the value of the ecosystem, so that you can then start thinking, well, if this was easier than driving down the road to my local restaurant, I can just have it delivered to my house. And that's when you get people on board. Then hopefully word of mouth spreads, more people start joining. And at this point, you need to ensure that you now are starting to get more people involved. Now, what happens if there's 10 million people who are now wanting to order off Mr. Delivery food, but you've got 10 delivery drivers? Well, you need to now get more delivery drivers. You need to expand the supply or delivery chains. You need to then make it that you can satiate the demand of the customer and not overextend the organization into too much debt without paying too much money to keep things going, and make it a financially viable business. And then finally, in stage 4, we need to optimize the contribution to the core business. So once the e-business that we have now has executed this e-business strategy, it's hopefully now fully matured, and we can continue to grow and evolve it in response to changes or novel ideas or anything new that we want to do. And now it's really boiling down to optimization, where we start rooting out the things in the organization that are impeding our progress. Like maybe finance is too slow to pay our drivers, so drivers are going to Uber Eats. Fix that process so we retain the drivers. We do kind of things where we now look about how can we get more people involved? How can we make it more profitable? These are all things that boil down to optimization. Once everything is in place and is working correctly, you want it to really be able to now continue to grow and evolve and become as optimized and therefore as profitable as possible. So now if you think about it, we've now got this e-business approach, and we're going to be using the internet. So obviously we're going to be using the internet as a channel, but it's going to be a channel for multiple different things. So when we think about strategic decisions that need to be made from an e-business perspective, now a lot of organizations are going to start thinking things like, well, we need to get into the e-commerce space, but we want to do it now as an e-business, which means we're going to want to use the internet for various different things. So you can use the internet to just provide information, have a standard web page, That's probably not where we're only wanting to go though, because if you're just using it as like a static web page that just provides information, you don't have a storefront, you don't have anything like that, you're really not using the internet to its full potential. We could use it to primarily export things. So let's say we've got an already established local community, we could then use the internet as a way of getting our products out of the borders of the country. We could use the internet as a channel for another channel. So let's say we have an existing retail store. That is a channel that we're going to be using to sell products. We could replace the internet with that store, or rather replace the store with an internet storefront and then no longer have a physical storefront. Let's say we had a call center. We could replace the call center with an online ticketing system. But we could also set up the internet channel as a completely separate business. So we've got ABC Incorporated and we've got ABC Online. Separate business, they're under the umbrella of our organization, but they're completely separate entities, and we can treat them as completely separate entities, although we can manage them centrally. And this is where we come into things like building mixed systems. And mixed systems are going to be comprised of having multiple different channels that effectively do the same thing but in different ways. And we're going to want to be making use of them where one channel is not as effective as reaching certain customers as it might be in a different channel. So one example is if you want to sell things to, say, Westerners in first world countries or in Asia or places like that, where they've got really fast, high-speed, fiber-based internet, you can have wonderful, pretty web pages. But if you think more about Northern Africa, where there's less fixed wired connections and more wireless stuff, you're wanting to maybe use more economical ways of advertising to people like that, so you don't burn up all their data. So we're going to want to be doing the same thing, but the channel that we're going to be using is going to be different, but the objective is still the same. So sometimes we could also think about it as switching to fully internet channels and completely removing retail. So we've already talked about that at length in previous lectures. So now you should start to see that things are starting to come together now. We've talked about channels, we've talked about internet, we've talked about people, we've talked about skills. Now the next thing we need to do is sort of talk about how does this get all managed from the top of the organization? And this is where the different forms of strategy are going to come in, because there are going to be lots of different levels in an organization where strategy needs to be done. And strategy is really going to be about how we make this game plan to get from where we are now to where we want to be. So the two main kinds of strategy that we're going to want to worry about are going to be the internal strategy and what we call our external strategy. So the internal strategy is going to be the achievement of higher level goals for the organization. So this is going to be a goal that's going to be set up so that the organization can do something. Like they want to build a new software package, or they want to implement a new better process for something. So that's going to affect the way the organization operates. So this is going to be used to do certain things internally to then achieve a higher level goal within the organization. Now, the next one is a strategy related to plans concerning the long-term position of the firm. So this is how we're going to move the organization further. So question here, so by a mixed system, do you mean we can use print media for marketing as part of an e-business strategy? Yes, absolutely, you can use print media as a form of an e-business strategy. Ideally, you're still producing an e-business strategy because you're wanting to sell a product using e-commerce as the way of doing the actual commerce. But you can market to people. Like, let's say you're producing a product for an older generation of people. They're more inclined to read the newspaper than the younger generation is. So if you wanted to print something in a newspaper for them, that might be a more effective way of advertising to those people than, say, going through, I don't know, whatever the big buzzword way of advertising to the youth is today. So identifying the right channel is going to be very important. So you could have side by side. You could tailor your advertisements to an older generation and put it through newspaper, and at the same time have a different advert entirely that goes out on YouTube ads or something like that. So yes, you can. Okay, so back to the two different forms of strategy. The next is the external form of strategy, and this is going to be more about thinking about how to position the organization in the future. So this is where we're going to talk about strategic planning and how we're going to then mobilize the organization into a particular market or a particular environment that it needs to be in. Some organizations were known for something in past years, but then in current times they do something completely different because the marketplace has changed. The way that they did business before is not viable now, and so they've been forced to move to the more online systems. So just talking about print media, newspapers are not printed in as higher volumes as they were 1 or 2 decades ago, but now they're selling online subscriptions where you could get a newspaper delivered to you electronically and you can read it. So you're still getting a newspaper, you're just not getting it in paper, you're just getting a news e-booklet or whatever it is. So if you think about it, something has to change internally in the organization so that you can reposition the organization externally. So this is where an e-business strategy is actually ultimately going to be inserted into the business. So if you think about it, corporate strategy is going to figure out where we want to be and what we want to do. Those kind of things will affect what kind of an e-business strategy we are going to want to develop. And the way in which we develop that e-business strategy might also in turn reciprocate and change the way that certain corporate strategies need to be done. Because we might figure out, well, we don't have the information systems competence to do this certain thing in the business strategy, so the corporate strategy might need to undergo some changes. But also we'll have things like our functional strategies, and functional strategies are just going to be areas or departments or disciplines inside the organization that all work together to make the organization run. So think about it like finances and HR are all functional strategies. They all have defined roles and goals and they do those kind of things. And ultimately, the information system strategy is going to affect the way the functional strategies operate and vice versa. So let's say HR is like, well, they've changed the way labor law works. We need to now do something with the data of all of our employees. That'll affect then the information system strategy. And ultimately, both of those things will affect the way the e-business strategy itself can work. And that'll have a knock-on effect to how corporate's able to then plan certain things. So let's say, for instance, let's say a horrible thing like slavery was legal at the time they were developing this e-business strategy. Well, if slavery was legal, you'd then have to have departments to manage those kind of people, and you'd have to have the system strategy. But now, thankfully, they've banned slavery. You're not allowed to do that at all. If the organization was operating like that and had the mindset that we just had free labor, then something's going to have to change. So naturally, if the laws of the land were to change, then the functional strategies need to change. The business strategy needs to change, because now you got to think, well, we don't have free labor anymore, so we need to now get the right skills and competencies. We need to pay people for that, which means financially there's going to be some kind of changes that need to take place. We need to start recruiting people, so we need the right systems in place to do that. We need to train people, so we need to have the right functional and system strategies to do that. And corporate needs to then change the way that it looks at the world. So I know that was a very contrived and very bad example, but something like major, like a change in legislature, could effectively change the way that the whole organization needs to work and be structured to get something done. So thinking about the way the e-business strategy drives the organization is going to then make you have to think about all the little independent components, how they work together, how they share information between one another, and then how we define where we're wanting to go from sort of a top-down or a bottom-up approach. So in coming lectures, we're going to talk about actual building blocks of an organization and how to arrange them and organize them so that they can then achieve maximal efficiency for an organization when it comes to building an e-business strategy. But for now, let's just talk about how we're going to position the organization from the top. So let's talk about corporate strategy for a little bit. So from the top, your organization needs to have the right goals. If you've got the wrong goals in mind, you're not going to go anywhere, because you're going to be going somewhere, it's just going to be the wrong place. And ultimately, once you've got the right goals in place, you must have it that those goals actually are going to deliver value in some way. If you have this wonderful product that there's no value proposition for, no one's going to ever want to buy it and give you money for it, which means your company is never going to be financially viable. And what you need to do then is actually have it that the strategy that we're developing builds itself a distinctive value chain. And by that, we mean that the strategy must at some point be able to be realized in such a way that delivers goods and services to customers so that they then go, well, I've got a good product, I've got a good service, I'm happy to exchange my money for it, win-win. That's what we're looking for ultimately. Now, unfortunately, not all these strategies are going to be clean, smooth sailing, as the saying goes. There's going to be some trade-offs. Well, we need to optimize the production line, but that means we need to train people to do it, which means we need to then put resources into doing that. Or either that, or we're going to have to replace the people with machines, which means there's going to be a lot of money up front in terms of buying those robots and a lot of unhappy people that you're going to have to deal with to do that. So these kind of trade-offs need to be thought about. And once we think about this goal and the strategy that we've got, we need to figure out how it actually will affect the way that the organization is fitted together. If you think about it, a large company is kind of like a car. A car has the goal of taking the person who climbs in the car from point A to point B. The strategy and the organization at large is kind of like a car, because it needs to get from point A to point B. But you need to put in petrol, you need to put in maintenance, and you need to get services done and those kind of things. But ultimately it needs to get from one point to the other, and that one point to the other will be to generate money. And that's what an organization does. And this will then ensure that we've got the right goals in place so that we have what is called continuity of direction. Continuity of direction is a process by which all decisions are made with the goal and purpose in mind, which means every action that is taken is kind of like a step on the path that goes from where the organization is now to where it needs to be. So sometimes if you think about why are we getting new people? Oh, we're getting new people because we need to implement this new technology. But we're implementing that new technology so that we can have this new system in place. This new system in place will allow us to then have this new supply chain that we can make use of. This new supply chain will enable us to build this new product. This new product will enable us to sell it to a new customer base and therefore break into a new market and become more profitable. So every single goal on the strategy path that we're looking at needs to kind of maneuver the organization from where it is now to where it needs to be. And in order to do this, we need to ensure that we have buy-in at the right levels of the organization. So now we're going to talk about the different levels of strategic positioning. So there are different places in the organization where your e-business strategy needs to be implemented. Primarily, the ones that are going to be affected the most are going to be at the operations level. So operations level is going to be the supply chain or value chain level. And this is going to be where the customer is going to be affected. This is where the people are going to be manufacturing, the people are going to be operating, the people are going to be your technical support staff. These are all the kind of people that get the day-to-days of the organization running. They're going to be affected by an e-business strategy. You also have middle management. Middle management manages the operations, and that's going to be your line of business or your strategic business unit level. And then at the very top of the organization, you've got the corporate or board level, and they then tell middle management what to do, and middle management then defines what operations need to do. So there is some level of abstraction between these different levels of strategy, but ultimately, if something gets defined at a corporate or board level, it will then boil down to the middle management level, which will in turn send off the information to their individual departments at an operations level. So if the corporate, let's say corporate has a strategy that they want to reduce paper by 50% to save the trees and save money, then corporate will say, well, you need to, and at your management level, reduce paper. And then middle management will say, well, we need to then reduce half the paper, and that will then boil down to individual department levels. So there needs to be this kind of like trickle down effect from the corporate board level at the top all the way down to operations. So an e-business strategy navigates the organization, but the organization is actually made up of multiple different levels of operations that take place. So at the supply chain or value chain level, this is going to be something that is going to be speeding up the ability of the organization to get information to flow around the organization. So this will be things like, if you're wanting to build a strategy that is going to affect the supply chain or value chain level, we need to figure out the right kind of information, like who are our customers going to be? What is the value that we're going to give to these customers? Who's going to supply the things that we need for the product? And then how can we then make sure that we get the right stuff from the suppliers, and how do we add value to them so that they want to continue doing business with us to make it a mutually beneficial thing. So at the supply chain or industry value chain level, it's going to be about figuring out who the right people are to do things and what we need to know about those people. When it comes to the line of business or the business unit level, now this is going to be more about a form of competitive strategy. It's going to be about what kind of markets do we want to work. We're not like looking specifically at like the customer to find out what the exact right product is going to be. This is more going to be like a focused general direction. Like we want to be in this market, and then you'll let the supply chain or value chain level figure out what the exact semantics of it are going to be. So this is going to be things that we need to consider. There are four major, generic strategies that we're going to be looking at. One is differentiation. And differentiation is going to be, how do we make our product different? And how does it distinguish us as an organization? Two is cost. Reduce the cost, increase the profitability. The scope, this is going to be, where are we going to be positioning it? Are we going to do it locally, internationally, both? How are we going to do it? Focus is going to be, are we going to be focusing on sort of a general market segment or a more narrow specific market segment? Are we going to be trying to sell shoes to the mass populace, or are we going to be selling running shoes to all the people who are going to be running? So that's going to be, are we going to have a broad market segment of shoes, or are we going to have the narrow market segment of running shoes, for instance? So those are the kind of things we need to figure out at a much higher level. Once we kind of know this direction, then we can hand it off to the operations level, and they can then figure out, oh, well, we're doing this thing about running shoes, now we need to build the most optimal running shoe, and that can then be a part of operations level. Whereas if we think about things from the enterprise or board level, we need to be thinking about things at a much higher level, and then directing things and making sure that we've got sort of the right bearing for the organization in mind. Now, enterprise level is very often going to focus on the importance of the high-level infrastructure. Now, high-level infrastructure is going to affect things like the way that we have the right IT infrastructure in place. So if we wanted to build an e-business, we need to ensure we have the right infrastructure in place. The right infrastructure will then have to have the right department in place for it in a large organization, which means then at a middle management level, there needs to be the right actual management to handle that. And then once the management's in place, the recruitment of the right operations level staff can then be implemented for it. So we're going to be looking at this thing called commonality for our e-business strategy, and there are two reasons for this thing called commonality. And number one is going to be efficiency, and the other is going to be effectiveness. So the strategy that we've got here at a corporate level is going to be a larger overall plan that's going to comprise several, maybe multiple different tactics, which are then going to be smaller and focused, maybe even less impactful. They're all going to get bundled up as a part of the larger plan. Now, what we're going to want to be doing here is focusing on doing the right tasks and doing the right tasks as effectively as possible. So if you think about something like, let's say we want to now implement an e-business strategy, we need to make sure that we are doing the right things. Like, are we getting the right department to do this? Do we have the right department to do this? Next is, are we going to be doing it as efficiently as possible and least expensive as possible? And are we just going to hire people for the sake of hiring people? We're going to reposition people who have the skills that are in other parts of the organization. Things like that are all going to be considerable when it comes to this sort of corporate high-level strategy. So I use the example here of implementing an e-business strategy, but it could be something like, we want to move into a new market, so this shoe sales market. That could be the high-level, the corporate high-level strategy is we want to move into this new market. But the organization is a rubber organization. They don't make shoes necessarily, which means they don't have an existing shoe department, if you will, which means they then need to figure out the right kind of governance structure for it. Like, do we have the right people who can then become the managers of the shoe department? Do we then have the right people in place that can then move to an operations level and implement the business processes required for it to all happen? So what happens is the corporate strategy drives the main direction. The corporate strategy then needs to be made up of a lot of lower level and more focused management level strategies, and those management level strategies in turn can be made up of multiple different operations level strategies. So always think of it almost like a pyramid. So you're going to have it that you've got this pyramid taking place where you've got your corporate at the top, which is then going to filter down. Oh, this is a very horrible triangle. Filter down to management, and then management will filter down to the individual organizational level operations or teams or whatever you have there. Okay, so something I want you to take away from this whole section is that think about it that when you think about strategy, strategy actually isn't just one monolithic strategy. It is a strategy that is going to be a direction, and it's going to then need to be broken down into all of its constituents that need to work together. So let's say you're wanting to build this new e-business strategy that you're wanting to now make shoes. You need to get finances on board. So operations level, finances needs to make available the money to do that, which means whoever's in charge of managing financial planning at the management level needs to then pass that information on correctly to our new e-business department and so forth. So think about it as a multi-level structure. So at the level of strategic planning is where we're going to be thinking about changing our competitive agenda. So the competitive agenda of the organization is going to be where the organization is going to want to better improve their business. So this could be things like we're wanting to move from a supplier-driven economy to a consumer-driven economy. And what do we mean by this? We're going to be designing things maybe with customer-centric design in mind. Think about it, now that people have become more accustomed to being able to change their products, add their colors, do whatever they want to do, this has become more customer-centric. And so we could change the way that we do things to involve the customer and ask them, what do they want us to build? A lot of organizations make use of things like surveys to figure out what kind of things the customers actually want. We could also be thinking about moving from mass production and distribution to mass customization, as well as customer-driven planning. So this is things like being able to optimize our supply chains in such a way that we can deliver the right kind of thing that the consumer or the customer actually wants as a part of their very specialized order. Think about it. If you want to customize a car, a lot of the time if you want to buy a car and get custom options, it'll take a lot longer to get it because now they have to get the factory to put it on and they special order it for you, and it takes a long time. So that's why a lot of the time a customer would be like, well, I'll just take the one that's on the floor, can you order me the parts, and then we'll add them on when we get here. So understanding the customer and having the right supply chain in mind can affect the way that you do business. We could also think of things as moving from a producer to a consumer focus. And this is going to focus on the customer constraints rather than production constraints. Customer constraints could affect things like customers want a high quality item, whereas a production constraint would be, well, reduce the quality of the item to increase profitability. So if you think about things like, say, an Apple cell phone. Apple cell phones have the feel of, say, quality to them because they get the brushed aluminium cases and whatever they come with them. So you get the quality, but you get a little bit of an older generation technology. So the phone is like 2 to 3 years older in terms of technology when compared to, say, a modern Samsung or Huawei or any of the newer, any of the competitors. So there's that kind of trade-off that takes place there. We could also think about things as moving from hierarchical to network organizational structures. Hierarchical structures are great for large organizations where you need to give the big direction at the top and then have faith in the middle management and below to then execute their particular tasks effectively. Network structure is more based on leveling out the organization from a hierarchical structure into a set of interacting parts that work together to share information with one another. This could also mean that instead of us implementing our own department that is going to be doing XYZ, we could outsource it because we can then spend our time and resources on the things that we are better suited to doing rather than having to now implement new things. So if you think about it, the whole organization needs to sort of shift and change to keep up with the times, but also it needs to constantly be reiterating and improving to increase profitability. Now, if you think about how this is all going to get done, this is going to be done through strategic systems. And strategic systems are going to be things like, let me get my laser pointer again, getting the company involved with customers and suppliers. So this is going to be about changing the nature of the relationships that the organization has. So if you think about an organization that is involved with the customer very often has a better rapport with the customer because they're able to then freely give information to the customers as well as request information from the customer. So the customer immediately thinks, well, the organization cares more because they're asking us for our opinions. So a lot of the time, this kind of thing can be done to gauge the sentiment of the customer. But also, it can be done to think about what kind of things do customers want, what do they like, what they dislike. It's almost like free information extraction, but all of it sort of tricks the customer into, I use the word trick lightly, is always about trying to get something to be improved. So a question here, for this module, is the bottom line always to maximize profitability? You know, in any business, there are a lot of factors involved, and maximizing profitability is one of them. But maximizing profitability at the expense of all else is more of an e-commerce thing than an e-business thing. Maximizing profitability and be damned everything else can lead to a business that could then self-destruct in a few years, a few months. So think about, you maximize your profitability to the nth degree, but you alienate your customers, you don't treat your suppliers fairly, you get a bad rep, you get bad product reviews. Well, yes, you've maximized profitability at the expense of a lot of other also very valuable things, like having a good standing with your suppliers, having a good standing with your customer, having a good relationship with all of the above is also very important. So when we think about things from an e-business perspective, we want to optimize to the best of our ability, but we also want to produce the best possible product, as well as the most structured, rigorously tested, and reliable supply chain as well. The reason being is, if we maintain good relationships, we are better positioned to keep customers, keep suppliers. We're better positioned to operate more effectively in future because we haven't gotten rid of customers who are like, well, I've bought this product, but I hate the company, I'm never buying from them again. So you're going to lose people, and that's what you don't want to do. You want to have people involved, because the more you know about your customer, the better you're able to produce a better product. You're better able to market to them. You're better able to do any number of things in the organization that you wouldn't have been able to do as effectively if you didn't have the involvement of the customer, for instance. So yes, we want to maximize profitability, but not at the expense of other factors that are interacting. Because remember, if we think about it, the organization is going to be dependent on the customer. It's almost like an ecosystem. You don't want to poison the water in the ecosystem just to get your better organization. Then you're going to eventually self-destruct your organization if you don't manage the ecosystem correctly. Okay, so moving along. So our different types of strategic systems, we're going to be looking at things like enabling the organization to bring new or improved information-based products and services to market. So ultimately, what we're wanting to do there is we're wanting to improve our products, improve our services. But how do we know to do this? Through data. Data that can be mined. Data can be asked for, requested, observed from customers, from people who test products, etc. So you're wanting to ensure that we're building the right kind of product, improving the products as need be, taking feedback into account, and then using it as to propel the organization forward. In order to do this, we need to have high quality information to support the development and implementation of our strategies. So where do we get the information from? Is it the right information? Are we getting customer insights? Are we getting insights into our competitors that enable us to then innovate, develop, implement our strategy, and move it forward as efficiently as possible? So ultimately, we're going to be doing a strategic planning process. Now that's just a fancy word for us having a methodology or a set of steps that need to take place in order for us to achieve the goal. So in order for us to go, well, I want to move into this new market, that's our new corporate strategy, how do we get from where we are now to there? Well, first we've got to know what our situation is. Where are we now? What kind of competencies do we have? What kind of financial state are we in? What kind of corporate culture do we have? What kind of organizational structure do we have? Then once we know who we are as an organization, what we've got available at our disposal, where are we going to go? This is the target. We want to get into this market. That is going to define what our goals are. That is going to define what the vision of the organization is going to be and what the mission is to get certain things done. And finally, once you know where you are and where you need to get to, you can better determine what your path is going to be. Simply put, that is how we get from the situation to the target. So this is going to be things like, what does the organization have that allows the organization to follow through with the plan? What kind of skills? What kind of technology? What kind of infrastructure, machinery, capital, etc.? What do we need to get from this situation to this target? We might need to hire people. We might need to fire people. We might need to buy a building. We might need to build a new supply chain. All those kind of things need to be decided upon, but they can only be decided upon once we know where the organization is and where it needs to go. So in order for this to happen, we need to go through a process. And this process is this is just a very general idea of how the process can be structured. So we're going to have a mission statement. And the mission statement generally for a strategic planning process is going to be, where do we want to go? So let's use an example of the university, because the university we can all kind of understand. So the University of Johannesburg has decided they want to be a cutting-edge university and use technology as a digital channel for learning, which I think is far more pertinent since last year with the COVID pandemic and everything than ever before. So if we think about it like that, now we have an idea of sort of where we want to go. The University of Johannesburg wants to go forward as a digital age learning institution that makes use of technology. So now what we need to do is analysis of external and internal information. So we could ask questions like, are our students able to use technology? Do they actually have the technology at their disposal? Do they have access to computers, tablets, etc.? What are other universities doing? Do they have online programs to get their students online? If yes, we need to benchmark them. What kind of capabilities do they have so that we can see where we stack up to the competitors? Do we have the staff that are able to implement the online teaching, the technological aspects, security for these kind of things? And does the organizational structure actually suit this problem? Then we're going to look at planning strategies and objectives of the organization. So, well, it's all good and well if we give every student a laptop, but do they know how to use them? Do they know what's available to them? Do they know the security risks of using modern technology? So this is going to be things like planning to train the students, hire people to develop simple web applications to integrate into the teaching process or the learning process. Choose what kind of things we're going to be putting onto the internet, like maybe is there going to be a Facebook page or a YouTube channel that's going to show information to get new students involved, or maybe help train students or things like that. And we need to also set targets, things like we need to have, say, 70% of our students online, or as is the case with COVID, 100% of students online in 2021. So these kind of things set clearly defined goals for what needs to be done based on information that we've acquired from internal factors like our skills, competencies, and the students themselves, and external factors like the competitors and maybe the prices of devices and data and those kind of information that we actually need to know about. And finally, we need to implement and then control the plans that we have available. So this will be things like development of web applications, training the students, actually doing the training, not just planning to do the training, and then monitoring to see, are we actually doing things correctly? Are we being successful? Because let's say we set that we want to have 100% of students online by 2021. Realistically, probably only 80% of students are online. The rest are having to use their friends' devices. They don't have enough data to watch videos all the time. And then these kind of feedbacks and controls need to then be fed back up higher. So maybe if you think about it, well, is it 100% realistic to get 100% of students online? Probably not. Then we need to maybe change the mission statement of the organization, or at the very least change the planning and strategies to maybe get students devices or buy them data or those kind of things. So I tried to use an example here that you could relate to as a student. I'm hoping that your situation is a bit better than the one described here, where not all the students have data, and I hope you have data and I hope you have access to computers. And that's just the hope that we have for this particular thing. So until we get actual concrete data that we can work with, we can't actually feed it back and implement higher level changes that will then have a knock-on effect down to the actual implementation of things. So that's what I want you to think about, that the strategic planning process, or the process that we're going to use to implement e-business strategy, is going to be this like cascading strategy that's going to then go from this very high level, almost abstract idea down to information gathering and planning and implementation. And then finally, once we've got data, we're going to feed it back up into the higher level stages of the plan, and then off we go. We've now got this plan that can grow, adapt, and evolve as we implement and get data in, and we monitor and we control. Okay, so that's what I want you to take away from this lecture for tonight, is that when you look at an e-business strategy, it's going to be like this high-level thing, but it needs to actually be grounded in reality. It needs to be thought of in terms of the low-level processes and people and data. They all need to have a place in the strategy, because if you just start implementing from the top without any thought about what needs to happen below, money can be wasted, people and technologies can be spanners in the works that could cause problems. So understanding that the organization needs to have one singular direction, but that direction is ultimately going to be affected by multiple moving cogs and gears below it in the different organizational structures, is very important for an organization. And we will come back to this in coming lectures, where we're going to talk about how we can relate different departments to one another, how we can relate different facets of the organization, that they can work more effectively together. So yes, if you have any questions, please do post them. I'm going to hang around for a few minutes to see if there's any questions, and if you don't have any questions for me directly now and you think of them later, please post them in the Discord server. And just as a reminder, there is a 1-week extension on the main research project, as a I'm sorry for not having your mini research projects out to you in time. So I will get them to you hopefully by the end of this week, and then you can then get your feedback on them. But in the interim, there is semester tests up. You can get your marked semester tests. Please do follow the notice on Eve to get a hold of that. Okay, if there are any questions, please post them. I'll hang around for a minute or two. If not, have a good evening. Welcome back to the second term, and now things should be getting interesting with this course. Okay, so we have a question here. Does e-business only exist on the internet, or can Pick n Pay's goal of having AI at their tellers be considered e-business strategy? Well, the answer to that is Pick n Pay an e-business or an e-commerce organization? And the answer to that is yes. It is an e-business and an e-commerce organization, because if you think about it, the way monetary exchanges take place can be done electronically. Their organization does sell stuff online. You can do online deliveries. They do online marketing. So having tellers that have AI integration of some kind is an e-business strategy. The reason being is because ultimately it's going to affect the positioning of the organization, but it's also going to affect other aspects. And in this case, we're thinking just about the physical aspects, like the actual people who are operating at the tellers. How's that going to affect them? How's the actual implementation of the AI systems going to work? Are they going to try and buy an out-of-the-box solution, or are they going to instead be developing the AI solution in-house? If so, do they have the right competencies, the right people? How are they going to procure the right computer systems to then install at the tellers? You see, all of these things kind of really boil down to all the stuff we've been talking about during the course. So to answer your question, yes, it is going to be e-business strategy to do something like that, because ultimately it's going to do things like reduce theft, be able to make checkouts happen a lot faster. I'll need to then read up on other aspects of the AI tellers and stuff to give you a more definitive answer or a more in-depth answer, but at a high level, yes, it appears to be a form of e-business strategy. So there's a question. Sorry, I can wait. Just want to ask, are we allowed to change the organization that we selected in the mini project for the main project? The answer for that is yes. If you feel that you have in your research given an incorrect or a less optimal e-business model, you can change that. You can also change the organization on the grounds that if you feel that you just can't find enough information about the organization. Now, I would normally allow you to change the model. Yes, change the model if you feel that you thought it was a business to business organization, but actually they're really more of a business to consumer organization. Already that's where they make their money. Then yes, I'm a little bit less happy about you changing your organization, but if you do feel that you can just find better information about another organization, then yes, you could change your organization. Okay, so Masande, I hope that answers your question. Next question, would that still be true if Pick n Pay did not have an online store? Well, if you think about it, the AI aspect of things is going to be computer related, which means there is going to be some kind of infrastructure required. Now, I don't think Pick n Pay is going to want to have high-powered computers at every till point to run the AI calculations and computations. So they then is going to need to be some kind of a server backend that is going to be processing, or they're going to need to be offloading to some cloud platform to process and do the AI related stuff. So it's still going to be considered an e-business aspect of things because there is that e aspect to it. There's an electronic computer-based system that is in use, and that electronic computer-based system needs to then do computations remotely, which means there needs to be an exchange of money to either implement those computer systems or to rent them and have them scalable on a cloud platform, etc. So I would still consider it to be an e-business related thing, even though it is happening physically in the physical stores for an organization that is just selling things physically. So remember, e-commerce is all the buying and selling activities that take place using the internet. So if you think about it from that perspective, the use of the AI portion is going to be a form of channel that is going to be used for information provisioning and those kind of things. So there's still going to be a monetary exchange that needs to happen for that. There still needs to be some kind of digital backend for that. So yes, still e-commerce, therefore still it can be implemented as an e-business strategy. Okay, hope that answers your question. Are there any other questions? If not, have a great evening. Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions, so please enjoy the rest of your evening, and I will then see you next week. Please watch on Eve for notices about the upload and return of your mini research assignments. I will post a notice on Eve as well as in the Discord server. If you do have any questions, please post them in the Discord server. Have a great evening, and thank you for your time.